English is not my native language, so I'm sorry if I make any mistakes. I'm a 22-year-old girl from Spain, and I'm very used to using public transport to basically everywhere. And it's not unusual to have some weird or creepy interactions with people. Mostly men who randomly start to tell you about their lives and how sad they are. I usually just nod and politely smile until they go away. And I try to be very nice and polite, because I'm terrified of offending a crazy dude in case they do something. It worked every time. Unfortunately, many times. However, this encounter in particular left me pretty shaken. I was on the train coming back home, and it was like a 40-minute ride. I usually just wear my headphones, but that day I decided I would just spend that time reading some random novel on my phone. It wasn't even dark out, so I was fairly calm. The wagon was mostly empty, except for a guy and a couple behind me, but I didn't pay much attention to any of them, because I get really focused when I enjoy a novel. The first 5 or 10 minutes were uneventful, until I saw that guy from behind me get up and change his seats to the one that was oriented towards me. Not immediately in front of me, but maybe 2 seats ahead, looking in my direction. Again, I didn't pay much attention, and I kept doing my thing. Then I hear the guy mutter some words. At first I thought he was talking on his phone or something, but when I looked up, he was looking straight at me, and didn't take his gaze away when I made eye contact. It was only then when I realized what he was saying. He was insulting or cursing me, repeatedly and non-stop, in a very calm voice, but low enough for me to understand. The insults range from bitch, whore, stupid, to much more colorful Spanish insults that I don't think I even have a translation for. I got paralyzed. Why was this guy cursing at me? I had done nothing to him. I barely looked at him. I thought maybe I'd pulled a face or something in the beginning, but I had a mask on, so I couldn't have. I began to panic a bit, as I didn't know what to do. It only got worse when the other couple that were on the wagon got off, so now it was only me and him. I thought about getting off the train too, but we were positioned in a way that made it impossible for me to get anywhere without walking right beside him, and I didn't want to get that close. I decided to ignore him, pretend I was not hearing him, and see if he would get tired and stop. But no, he just kept going. It was the creepiest thing, because he was barely stopping to breathe between insults. He just kept going, repeating the same things over and over again, in a menacing and threatening tone, with hate in his words and his eyes, always looking right at me, even though I tried my best not to look back. And then, things got worse. He started mixing physical threatening with his insults. I'm gonna kill you. I'm gonna bash your brains in, and stuff like that. That's when I really started to freak out. Insults were one thing, but I felt this was escalating. I started messaging my friends, my boyfriend, telling them the situation. My boyfriend tried to call the train security phone, but there wasn't much they could do. I didn't dare call them myself because I didn't want this guy to know I was calling for help. I also wanted to cry so badly, but I didn't let myself because I didn't want to encourage him by letting him know that he had an effect on me. For some reason he moved. He changed seats, the one that was behind me. I got out of the train and on the next station, even though it wasn't my stop, because I didn't want him to know which one was my stop. I kept looking behind me, fearing he would follow me and act on his threats, but I didn't see him anymore. One of my friends picked me up in his car, and he took me home. The whole ride I was shaking and crying, kind of laughing hysterically, because I couldn't understand what had happened, nor why I got paranoid for a bit thinking he would somehow follow. But I haven't seen him again since then. The worst part is that I was scared of using the public transport for a couple of days after that. I was so frustrated that a fucking weirdo could have that effect on me, and that he'd done that to someone he didn't even know. I kept thinking, what would have happened if I hadn't been wearing the headphones and hadn't realized what he was doing? I wouldn't gotten off on my stop like normal. Would he have followed me? The train station where I usually stopped was a pretty shady area, and I still get creeped out whenever I think about what could have happened if we had been alone there. I'm even shaking just a bit thinking about it. So, to the random dude on the train, let's not meet again. Also, what the fuck? So, to preface the story, I was about 15 to 16 years old at the time. It was my best friend's birthday, and she invited about 6 of us over to the place for a few games, such as Mario Party, Mario Kart, Guitar Hero, and etc., and to stay the night in celebration of her big 16. So at this get-together, there's about 5 girls, including me, and 1 boy. After a while, my best friend asked if we would like to go to the playground, which was about a 10-minute walk away from her house. Of course, being stupid teens, we agreed, not thinking about how it may be dangerous since it was a majority of us were young girls, and it was currently 10 p.m. Anyways, we walked down to this park and continued playing Grounders when we arrived, which, if you don't know, is a game commonly played in elementary schools. The rules are, one person is it, and the person who is it must close their eyes and try to seek the other players as they head on the ground, equipment in order to tag them. But there's a catch. If someone gets off the equipment, and the person who's it calls grounders while they're on the ground, and they get tagged. Yeah, I know it's a pretty childish game, but it's fun. After a few rounds, we get bored and decide to huddle around in a circle in the center of the playground equipment. We're just walking and talking, joking around, and suddenly, I heard what I thought might have been something like rocks hitting the chain link fence that resided on the back of the playground. I hushed the group. I looked over at my best friend asking if she had heard that. As everyone looked at me like I had 10 heads, she asked what I meant, and when I told her it sounded like someone was throwing rocks at the fence behind us, she responded with the classical, "Ooh, it's a murder coming to get us." Naturally, I glared at her, flipping her off, and she knows I get paranoid sometimes, but I have a very good intuition. Something just felt off. After a few minutes later, some more rocks were being thrown at the fence, and I obviously stared down the area behind the fence, which was all woods besides the house on the left, and right at the playground in paranoia. I noticed a light weaving its way through the branches of the trees. At first I thought maybe it was just a headlight of a car that was coming down the street, that connected to the street to the park, since you can vaguely see through the headlights of oncoming traffic through them. But I soon realized that it was only one light, and it was bouncing up and down, like it was being held by someone who was walking. I quickly pointed it out to the group around me, and we all snapped our heads over in the direction. Coming up along the side near the house and to the left side of the park was a man who wore a hat, with some white baggy and dirty sweatpants, and a black coat. He was holding a flashlight. Not the one on your phone, but an actual flashlight. He was too far away to guess his age, even when he sat on the swings closer to the playground equipment we were on. But we all collectively agreed it was strange since he seemed, I guess from his clothes, to be in his mid to late 20s, and just came out of the woods by himself and sat there and stared at a load of kids. After a brief discussion, we agreed that maybe he was waiting for a ride, or he was just resting for the moment. So we tried to brush off the fact that he was sitting and so intensely staring at us off. However, we started to take note that after a few minutes of us resuming our very competitive game of grounders, that this stranger was slowly inching his way closer to the group, and he went from sitting on one of the swings furthest away, to the next swing, and a bit closer to the equipment we're on, to the next, until he was just about 10 feet away from our game. The whole time we just sat there watching. At this point, all of us noticed the strange man attempting to get closer to us, and in an attempt to resolve ourselves from a potentially dangerous situation, we made a group decision to leave. Getting up, we all piled off the playground equipment, and in pairs of 2, we walked down the stairs to the side furthest away from the creepy man, and as we attempted to casually walk away, I kept my eyes glued to his figure, and as we neared the end of the street, he got up. Slowly at first, the man started to trail behind us. Keeping his distance, I decided to keep my mouth shut, and at the time, because we were all about to make a turn, I thought that if he continued to follow us instead of going the other way, I'd bring it up to the others. And wouldn't you know it, The creep stays hot on our wheels, not only following which turn we took, he also started sprinting towards us screaming, "You motherfuckers! I'll fucking kill you!" At this point, the whole group burst out into sprint. The adrenaline I felt made me run so fast I was ahead of everyone else. Everyone was ushering each other to run. I didn't even take a second to see if the others were behind me. That was until I heard my best friend struggling to run. She had pretty bad asthma, and I instantly felt horrible for running off on her. So I ran back to her side, grabbing her hand and quite literally dragging her along, repeating things like, "Deep breaths. You got this. Come on, we have to go now." This whole time the man still running, screaming behind us and catching up quickly. At this point, both me and the other girl in the group took it upon ourselves to get my best friend moving as fast as possible, both taking a hand and running at pace so she could keep. Luckily, this park was only about a 10-minute walk from my friend's house, if even that much, and as we all piled in through the garage door, I turned to see the delusional man start running up the driveway. He got about halfway up until the big fluffy savior ran to the open door, my friend's 100-pound fully grown German Shepherd. She lurched at the man, barking, as we gripped her collar, in an attempt to keep her from running completely after the man. Luckily, her sudden and loud appearance caused the man to freeze in fear, before running down the dark lamp-lit street. We were terrified for the rest of the night, and only managed to sleep after putting random items next to us. We even had a rake, but most comforting, our big fluffy hero, just in case the creep decided to come back. So, to the crazy creep who enjoys watching kids at the park, and then chasing them home, let's not meet again.
I told the story to a friend recently and they seemed genuinely surprised. I guess they thought something similar happens to everyone. They suggested sharing my story, so this seemed like a fitting place to do so. It was the summer of '98, hot California desert. I was 5 years old riding shotgun in my mom's crappy little convertible. It barely ran, but the seats were red velvet, the radio worked, and being able to take the top down almost made up for the lack of air conditioning. My days were normally spent at a daycare or the babysitter's, as my single student mom put in long hours at her job to provide for us. I didn't mind, it just meant that days like today were even more special. My mom was driving me across to the next country, to my cousin's house for a birthday party that was going to be complete with dress-up games and ice cream cake. To truly seal the deal, she had taken us to McDonald's right before we headed out on our drive. I got a Happy Meal, with the stuffed Simba from The Lion King as my toy. This will be important later. Our convertible eased onto the freeway, and for the most part it was pleasant and an uneventful ride. I remember the loud noise of the cars and the hot wind. I first became aware of the truck as it laid on its horn behind us. I turned to the seat to see a huge gray monster of a truck tailgating us, ridiculously close. As soon as it was safe, my mom changes into the slow lane on the right of the freeway, assuming he will pass us. He pulls to level with our car, rolls the windows down, and begins screaming at us to pull over, in the middle of the desert, on the freeway. My mom ignores him and tells me to do the same. I remember feeling uneasy, but less scared than annoyed. Kinda like, dude, come on. This is my day to have fun. Leave us alone. Besides, I wasn't really a stranger to angry shouting men, even at that age. Unfortunate, but true. I think the lack of reaction irritated the man, or maybe this was his plan the entire time. But he swiftly pulls into our lane and essentially forces us off the road onto the shoulder. My mom does her best to maintain control of the car and not make contact with the other vehicle, but that's pretty much impossible. The unmistakable crunch of metal rings out, and both vehicles come to a stop. Again, on the side of a desert freeway. Not exactly anyone around to help out or places to go. My mom checks me to see if I'm okay and remains in her seat. Now, if I were her, I don't know if I would have waited to confront this man with a child in my car after that stunt. However, my ma has and always will be the tough as nails type of gal who isn't afraid of anything, especially when she feels like she has been wronged. And of course, she has no idea what was to happen next. In a flash of anger and cursing, the man is at the driver's side door, screaming about the damage to his car and how it was caused because of food trash that had been flying out of the convertible, landing on his front window and blocking his view. He starts demanding compensation, that my mom get out of the car and come back to look at it. At this point, my mom refuses to get out of the car. She points at a call box a fair distance away and says it's best to call the cops and let them handle this. Not the answer the angry man wanted. In one fluid movement, this man grabs the back of my mother's head and once, twice, 3 times smashes it into the steering wheel, leaving her unconscious. Lifting her like a sack of potatoes, he drops her on the side of the road and jumps into the driver's seat. Keys still in the ignition and starts the car up. I haven't even reacted yet. I think I was in an absolute state of shock. It wasn't until I felt the car moving and getting back onto the road that I registered what had just happened. And when it hit me hard. I went ballistic. I was no longer just annoyed with this man. I was now furious for what he did to my mom. I remember I held my stuffed Simba by the tail as I climbed out of my seat and began screaming while whipping the man in the face, trying to blind him. My battle cry was, "You're the meanest man in the whole world." I clawed and kicked and gave no care to what was going to happen to me. Just that this man was going to pay. This led to a couple things happening. First, I made it impossible to drive that car safely, and he ended up crashing into another shoulder. Second, by this time people had started to see a combination of a woman lying on the shoulder and a convertible with a Tasmanian devil of a 5-year-old beating up on some creeper and began to alert authorities. I don't remember too much after that. I remember the cops coming up and sitting in the back of a police cruiser. They gave me a teddy bear and asked me a lot of questions. My grandma ended up picking me up. My mom went to the hospital where she thankfully didn't have any major damage, just a busted nose and some whiplash. I never made it to my cousin's party, and I never saw that white convertible again. I'll always be thankful for my main man Simba, having my back through all of that. I don't know what the man's intentions were. Looking back and knowing the area we lived in, it wouldn't surprise me in the slightest bit if drugs played a major part in all this. But yeah, creepy carjacker, let's not meet. I've been a fan of Let's Not Me stories for some time now. The majority of kidnapping/attempted kidnapping stories I read tend to happen to females. As a man in his 20s, I thought I should share the 3 times I was almost kidnapped while growing up. The first story happened when I was 4 or 5. This happens to be one of my earliest memories. So one summer, my grandparents would invite my immediate family to go camping with them. They have an RV just big enough to cram all of us in. So we RV camped at a place called Goose Pond in North Alabama. During this trip, my grandpa taught me how to ride a bike without training wheels. After many tries and fails, I was actually able to ride my bike pretty well. So out of excitement, I asked my parents if my brother, who was a few years older than me, and I could go riding our bikes. So they said we could ride this short loop where about 60% of the loop can be seen from the RV. So me and my brother grabbed our bikes and took off. While riding around the loop, nothing eventful happened until we reached the final turn. This turn was barely out of view of my parents in the RV. So when my brother and I turned the loop, a car pulled up behind us. So we got off our bikes and stepped off the road to let the car pass. When the car got parallel to us, it stopped. A man from the car rolled down his window and started talking to us. He said something along the lines of, "I have candy in my car if you want some. Just come over here and I'll give you a piece." Ignorant young me took a step in the man's direction. As soon as I took that step, my brother grabbed my shoulder and said, "Let's go back to the RV." As soon as we pedaled away, the man drove off. The second story happened when I was 10. For some background information, in my small town, the Civic Center basically shares a parking lot with the baseball fields. So my family was at the Civic Center to watch my little sister graduate from preschool. The graduation was around 5 p.m. and I had a baseball game at the fields next door at 7 p.m. So after the graduation, I asked my parents if I could walk across the parking lot to find my team while they cleaned up. And they gave me their blessing. As soon as I walked out the front door and turned to head toward the baseball fields, I saw 2 men loitering in the parking lot. They saw that I was alone and asked me to come over to them. Me, being oblivious to the danger I was in, said that I need to get to my game, that it starts soon. They asked me if I played baseball and why my parents would let someone like me walk all by myself. They offered to walk with me, and I replied, "No thanks, I'm just going to the baseball fields." When they noticed I wasn't cooperating as they hoped, one of the men lunged in my direction and grabbed at me. Luckily, I was far enough away that he didn't get to me, and I took off. I don't think I've ever run that fast in my life before this. Luckily, the men didn't run after me, and I found my team moments later. When my parents got to the field, they were panicking to find me. Apparently, someone reported those men in the Civic Center, and my parents were scared to death that they had gotten me. My last story happened when I was 14. Again, as background information, my house is next to a major highway with several gas stations and convenience stores within walking distance. My hometown is one of the safest towns in the state. Close to this incident, my town was ranked up in the top 25 safest towns in the state. Because of this, my parents didn't mind if I walked to the store to grab snacks, as long as I asked permission first. So one day I was walking to the store. Nothing happened on the way down there, so I walked to the store to buy some snacks. On the way back, I noticed a truck driving by me. When he passed, I looked up and saw a man driving was just staring right at me. He wasn't paying attention to the road, just me. So he passed me, and I saw him turn around at the entrance of the neighborhood by my house and start heading back in my direction. At this time, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I see people turning around all the time there. When he drove by me the second time, he was going noticeably slower than the first time and was staring me down. When he got parallel to me, he stopped and opened the door to try to grab me. God must have been looking out for me, because as soon as he did this, a car pulled up behind him and forced him to continue down the road. As he drove away, I watched him and saw him turn around again and start heading in my direction. At this point, I was panicking. I took off behind my neighbor's house and hopped the fence into my backyard and went directly into my house. I remember I was home alone, and the terror started to sink in. I immediately rushed to the window to see the man carefully scanning the area where he last saw me. He was looking for me. He stayed in his car, going so slow that it took him what seemed like 5 minutes to actually pass my house. When he started to pass my house, I noticed he was trying to see through the window from the road. I ducked down and hid, only looking through the bottom corner of the window. Eventually, I saw him speed off, never to return again. As a boy growing up, people never thought these types of things could happen to me. It is a mystery to me how I was able to avoid kidnappers 3 times. Most people aren't that lucky. To all the young people and parents reading this, it does not matter if it's a boy or girl. Predators are everywhere, and to my attempted kidnappers, I hope we never meet again.